Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. As I had promised, I am back for a new video. And some of you I might have seen on Friday when I released a video that was a bit more technical, talking about the interpreting the cognitive functions as vertical faculties. I refer you back to this video if you're interested in exploring this topic. But today we're going to be approaching a subject that I discuss from time to time, but I'm starting to realize it is more important to discuss it in detail than I had thought so far. And this is a topic of the intersection between the Enneagram and MBTI. Now, before I move on with my topic, you know what's going to happen. Just give me a second. As you know, I am a father. I have 2 kids, and these are my kids. I happen to sell my kids, which is not something that I should really admit. But reference work on the INFJ, the Ecstatic Soul, 65 reviews on Amazon, average of 4.4 stars, less than $10. You know the drill. It's available in links below, and my new novel, The Infinite Castle, if you're interested in supporting me as a creative writer, which I might argue is my single most treasured vocation, but the one that is the hardest to make a living from. Please consider clicking on the links and having a look at the description, and maybe you'd be interested in the story that is described. It's on the back over there. Okay, so without further ado, let's talk about INFJ and Enneagram. Why is it an important topic? Because you'll find people who have the same attitude towards Enneagram while taking MBTI seriously as people who take science seriously and dismiss MBTI. So if you like, Enneagram is the victim on the part of some people of the same kind of prejudice that MBTI is the victim of on the part of supposedly positivistic scientific people. From the moment that you admit that MBTI is more credible, at least so far, as a vocabulary to describe your self-perceptions, Enneagram is exactly the same, and therefore, to the extent that it can provide a useful complementary vocabulary to describe your self-perceptions, you have no reason to dismiss it. And what's really important to emphasize here is that the two vocabularies, the vocabulary of the MBTI, INFJ, INTP, cognitive functions, so on and so forth, and the vocabulary of the Enneagram, the description of the various types, type 1, type 2, tri-type, fears, stressors, integration, vectors, all those aspects. Quite complementary. Enneagram and MBTI don't quite describe the same things. Enneagram seems to capture something that is more motivational and emotional about people. You could call that a dimension of their I guess you could say it captures a dimension of their personalities that is not quite cognitive. So it doesn't really talk about cognitive functions because that's not what it's about. And yet it really, really, I think, provides a useful grid to kind of know where you stand. And if you crisscross it with reference to your MBTI type, say INFJ, you'll get a finer sense of the kind of INFJ you are than even if you were to describe yourself as an introverted INFJ or as a slightly more extroverted INFJ or an NIFE INFJ, an ITI INFJ. Some people even describe themselves as an NISE INFJ, INFJs that have very unusually developed SE, that kind of thing. All these are fine, but adding the Enneagram pattern to this, to this painting of your personality is really going to add a flavor that you would not have otherwise. And so far what I've said, there's nothing super revolutionary about it. But the reason why I wanted to come back to this is that it is my belief on the basis of self-exploration of Enneagram regarding my type and of observation of various people, including quite a few INFJs that I've been interacting with over the months and over the years. It is my belief that a lot of INFJs, I'm talking here of INFJs that are correctly typed or seem to be correctly typed. It is my belief that that a lot of INFJs haven't really figured out what their real Enneagram is. If you look online, you will see that the Enneagram types that are supposed to be most correlated with INFJ are type 2, type 4, type 9, closely followed by type 1 and type 5. So you never see 3s, 8s, 7s. That's something that you'd be familiar with, and you'd see some INFJ 6s, you would, but not as many as the other types I mentioned. And among you, my dear friends, and you're going to tell me in the comments, I hope, there are probably a lot of you who identify as one of those 3 types, 2, 9, or 4, and probably also quite a few that identify as a 5 or as a 1. Now here's the claim that I'm going to make, and that I'm not going to have time to fully defend in this video. Not that I would be able to defend it completely, because it would require a lot of unpacking, and maybe in future videos I can explore that theme further. My claim is that there's not a lot of INFJ 1s, far fewer than people think. There's not a lot of INFJ 4s. At least there are definitely some INFJ 4s, but not a lot, not as many as it's supposed to be, like the most common INFJ type. That's not the case. Very much doubt it. And there are quite a few INFJ 9s, I'll grant that. More or less, I think a lot of INFJ 9s who identify as 9s seem 9. That's one that I'm happy to grant are probably 9s, because 9 is quite a specific Enneagram, and if you identify as a 9, you're probably a 9. If you're not, you probably have it strong in your tri-type. But my claim is then that, further, that there's at least as many 5s as people think. Yeah, about the same. And also that there are nowhere near as many INFJ 2s as people think. So principally, as you might notice, I think that there are inflated numbers, particularly of 1s, 2s, and 4s. There are also 5s that I think mistyped. But then there are people who are mistyped as another Ennea type that are probably 5, so that compensates, and that's why I said that I think overall the figures are more or less probably the same. You'd have some INFJs 5 for sure. So how come do I think, who am I to think, that a lot of INFJs who identify as 1s, 2s, 4s or 5s, and maybe even some 9s. Let's throw 9s in the mix, even though I think that there's a lot of them that are really 9. Are mistyped, because I think they're all 6s. And I'm not extrapolating from my experience, because if you've ever visited my personality database page, you'll have seen that, I don't know, less than a year ago I kind of came out, if you like, as a 6 with a 5 wing. Although if you look at my page, the majority of people are still typing me as a 5 with a 4 wing. Now I do think 4 is my tri-type, and 1 is in my tri-type too, but I'm pretty sure my core is 6. And there's a lot more 6s among INFJs than is usually realized. I think a lot of 2s are 6s, I think a lot of 4s are 6s, and I think some 5s are 6s, and some 1s are 6s. The reason why it's vastly underestimated in the figures. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. First reason, the 6 is kind of a vague, fuzzy, kind of catch-all category. We can never quite capture what the type 6 is, because the type 6 seems to be defined more by what it lacks than by what it has. So 6 is supposed to lack, it's supposed to lack stable, secure identity. It's supposed to lack a certain kind of inner confidence. It's supposed to lack a desire for the expression of authenticity. It's supposed to lack this, supposed to lack that. We never hear a positive description of the 6 in the way that we hear positive descriptions of the 1, the moral reformer, of the 2, the altruistic helper, of the 5, the analytical thinker, of the 9, in fact. The 9 is a little bit like the 6, the descriptions are, but still, the 9 is the spiritual seer type, kind of very intuition-oriented INFJ in this case. But the 6 is kind of, if you're not any of these things, then by elimination you're a 6. So not very well defined usually by deduction and by elimination rather than by affirmation, which has the consequence that leads me to my next point, that the 6 is not an attractive, it's not a relatable type. And in MBTI, in the Enneagram, as in a lot of personality systems, the element of wanting to identify to something positive is very hard to eliminate from an assessment of what your type is. Surely, even people who, and I know that there are some among you who think that think it's very hard to be an INFJ, there must be part of the INFJ personality that they like, that they think has something positive to contribute to the world and to their social circles, to the next generations. There has to be something like that, otherwise it's alien, And the 6, as long as you read descriptions online, sometimes you read about the 6, and the 6 is called a loyalist. It's like loyal at all costs, or the buddy, or the 6 is like the kind of anxious, sort of, very suspicious kind of person. There's no reason why people would want to identify with the type that is both described in, you could say in some senses, derogatory terms, and that doesn't really seem to be stable anyway. What is the positive content here? Positive in the terms of concrete, as well as in terms of not negative. It's hard. But the 6 is in fact a type that is, I think, having thought about it a lot. First of all, it's a head type, and there's a lot of INFJs who are head types in Enneagram terms. But it's the 6 is, if you like, it's the head type that is struggling with a sense of inner incompleteness, and has to do things to try to compensate for that incompleteness. So that might sound negative, but the sense of incompleteness that is inner has some positive or potentially positive expressions, because the 6 is going to strive to deal with that incompleteness, and that could lead to some very productive and creative activities, endeavors, and parts of their life. It's also, if channeled properly, I'm not talking about phobic versus counterphobic, because that's yet another dimension. The INFJs would be phobic almost in all cases. But it's also, if it's channeled properly and the 6 essence is not repressed or neglected, it has the virtue of being skeptical of everything in a sense. Now, you might say that's not a virtue. It's a virtue because it's a rampart against dogmatism. And you'll notice that usually you'd identify a 6 with dogmatism, but it's actually not. Dogmatism, if anything, is much more likely to happen in the case of a 1 or of an unhealthy person. Sixes are perpetually uncertain. It's true that in certain not so healthy forms, they will look, as part of their search for filling in the incompleteness, they would look for outside authority to complete them, including providing them with certainty. So they might look like they're potentially looking for someone dogmatic to fix them, to put them in a place solidly like a statue and make them stable. But over time, that won't be able to last, because the essence of the six, in a sense, is to have no essence. And that sounds like it could be intense, but again, it's fundamentally a very creative type. Not necessarily creative in the sense of being a four creative type, but creative in the sense that it constantly has to reinvent itself. And I think that's why a lot of INFJs who are twos identify as sixes, because a lot of sixes might behave like twos because they think that the way for them to complete their identity is to assume the identity of an altruistic helper. And it's not even that it's fake on their part. They do it with perfect sincerity. But if you like, the drive inside, if they look at it deeply, 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 and this is an important point that I will apply to the other type confusions with the six, so I want you to keep that in mind. The original motivation is not pure altruism. In the case of the four mistype, it's not pure expression of individuality. In the case of the five, it's not pure intellectualism. In the case of the one, it's not pure moral, an instinct for, moral probity and reform. You're a six if you might have these traits, right? But underlying those traits, there is a kind of much more cerebral anxiety, a search for stability and security. And out of the need to find a solution to those existential states which are unstable and therefore unpleasant, you direct yourself to productive activities, such as you might be in the domain of moral reform, particularly if you have one in your tri-type, as a helper, as a creative artist, or as a creative person, as a subject-oriented person, as an intellectual, and so on and so forth. The six is someone who, at the end of the day, fundamentally always questions whether they are exactly fitting that particular category. Because what's driving them is actually a head concern, not a heart concern or a gut concern. I sometimes refer to the six as the anxious intellectual. In some sense, that's very much what defines them. And they are led to do things and their being led to do these things is actually part of who they are, but they can shapeshift between different types. And this video is getting a little bit long, but I suppose in the follow-up video I'll have to explain why I think that really fits the INFJ. If you look at a lot of INFJ 4s, they're sixes. That's the most common mistype. Because you'll notice a four expresses a very strong sense of identity in their creative endeavors and in their conversation with other people. You get a strong sense of identity. A six is someone who is very preoccupied with their identity and looks for the completion of that identity. So it starts from the opposite perspective. Both have a very strong preoccupation with identity. The four wants to express it, the six was to find it. You see the difference? And that defines the six. But again, I'll have to explain in the next video, because this turned out to be longer than I thought it would be. I'll have to explain to you why I think that the INFJ is very clearly, strongly correlated with type 6. But until then, let me know what you think. Maybe some of you are shocked. Maybe some of you completely disagree. I don't mind. Please tell me. Let's have a constructive conversation. And don't forget that you can support me on Patreon. That would be of great help. And obviously you can support me with my books as well. See you soon, guys. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.